Hey, hi, welcome back to Pedal Party Pedagogy, the show where I, Buttercup, animator, illustrator, and sequential artist, unaccredited, underqualified, and absolutely unwilling to check Wikipedia to make sure what I'm saying is accurate, tell you what I think you should do with your art. My only qualifications being that I'm autistic, a Virgo, and have very strong opinions. Today, we're working on screen tones in Clip Studio Paint. Okay, so today we're working with a page from my comic Panuman, which is in basically Arrested Development. It's a sequel series to the comic that I'm currently working on, but I started working on it because I wanted to submit it to a manga contest. But the great thing about it, though, is that we now have a template to work from in terms of using screen tones to make this scene more expressive. Now, typically when making a new file that is supposed to be manga or manga adjacent, you're going to want to use one of the standard templates. For instance, you see here B5 size, B6 size, A4 size, or A5 size, because this will allow you to standardize your manga to reflect the industry standard print settings. And you see that it starts with the default frequency, if you look in the middle of the screen, of 60, the standard frequency of lines per inch, or LPI, when printing manga. We're not going to make a new file here because I have a very specific print setting for my comic, but just keeping that in mind I think is important. So what I usually do when I want to use screen tones in a piece, I start with a standard value interval color swatch. So I created this in response to the realization that after reading a bunch of manga, specifically Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood, that Hiromu Arakawa uses maybe 4 or 5 different values as the basis for like the actual size of the dots in the screen tones that she uses. And I realized that like by limiting myself to a specific number of values, I can get a standard feel across the entire manga. So I usually use straight up black for when I'm doing inks, somewhere around here for darker tones, somewhere within this range for medium tones, and then for just when I want to have a little bit of a highlight just for a little spice, then I'll do one of the lighter tones. The main character in my comic is named Panuman, as you can see. His catchphrase is, "I don't care who goes last as long as I win." And he's wearing a school uniform, which I imagine is a light shade. So we're going to apply a medium-low shade to the entire uniform in this bottom panel. And we're just like, before actually applying any screen tone, we're just going to do like a fill layer using this lighter color. Now that we've applied this color, we can turn it into a screen tone, either by selecting what's present on the layer right now, and using the launcher, the selection launcher here, and hitting the plus screen tone button, which will automatically add a screen tone at the standard density and angle of 154, supposedly because it looks more manga-y, screen tone-y. And so we've applied it now. Now that's a bit dark to me. Like, this is giving more a deep blue than like the color that I imagine the uniform to be. So we're going to delete this screen tone layer. Yeah. And continue to fill things out as if we were doing a fill layer. If we toggle the layer property and bring this out here, you'll see there's the layer property window up here, this one. And there's an option here that looks almost identical to the add screen tone in the selection launcher. And we're just going to click on it. And it's applied the preset that I have set, which is a frequency of 60 lines per inch, and then an angle of 154 here. And this is much lighter, and that's because when we did the selection doodad and applied the screen tone to the selection, it made a new layer and added screen tone to it with a layer mask. So that seems suboptimal to me, though it may allow you to be more specific with the density, I suppose, right? You can increase and decrease the density here. And if you have percentage intervals that like mimic the value intervals that I have preset in my value palette, then like maybe this is useful, but I think I prefer using the colors in my value palette. But so this is still a bit dark to me. Maybe the answer to this is that we use this color as the shading color and have the actual uniform be white. Because like when thinking about these intervals, there's this thing called posturization where a value represents a certain range of values, and it's the value, you know, between this value and this value. Like if it's more this value, then it'll prefer this value, it'll posturize to this value, and if it's more this value, it'll posturize to this value. And you can have it so that posturization simply splits between black and white, and then that way it would only be, you know, black posturization and white posturization. So the way that I made this in the first place was that I took one of these pop-up intermediate color palettes, and I just used black and white as the extremes, and then selected the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 intermediate colors, ignoring the second to last ones, because for whatever reason you can't just select this color again. It's going to fill it with the color that you have selected. So we've got white, black, and then each of these intermediate colors are the middle ones. So I'm just gonna refill that palette. I said bloop. Okay, so like I said, I think that the best option that we have here is to have the screen tone value that we're using be the shadow. And there's a couple ways that we could go about this, right? Is simply delete everything that's on the layer, or we can select the range of the layer, delete the interior, but then select the same color that we were using for this value around here. And while we have this area selected, I'm going to make the selection border invisible, but know that it won't color outside of the bounds because it's still selected. I'm using just a standard marker tool to shade this. And you can also use the fill tool for the interiors that are fillable. And this way you can get sort of a what do you call it, like a cell shaded screen tone effect. So now we've done just like some light screen tones to sort of give the impression that this shirt, this top, has a little bit of weight to it, without like really doing very much at all. Now, because we have the area selected where these fills are happening, either we can simply deselect it and like pick a tone for Panemon skin and use the fill tool to just boop, boop, boop. Or you can make a separate layer for this same purpose. So we make another layer, and because I have my layer properties preset to make the frequency, angle, etc. screen tone that we want, we just make a new layer and then add the screen tone feature. And then we're just gonna like pick a value and then use the fill tool to fill the parts of the image corresponding with the color we were planning to use for Pokemon skin. Yeah. Okay, so I picked a slightly darker tone because that's consistent with how it looks in the rest of the comic. He looks like Hunter x Hunter. Yeah, that's part of the vibe. I already showed that I did that I used like a marker brush to do the shading for the t-shirt. But for skin tones, right, which usually have a bit softer shading, one thing that you can do is choose the airbrush tool and have it set to rather than a color, a not color. This is a feature that Clip Studio has where instead of choosing like the top color or bottom color, you can choose this checker pattern and it'll be basically effectively be an eraser. So you can turn the airbrush tool into an eraser without like having to set your eraser tool to airbrush. And by doing that, you can sort of gently wipe away the screen tone, which what this does is it makes the actual dots smaller until they disappear. Like the opacity is set to 50%. So it's not going to completely disappear just by doing a couple strokes. So you can give this really gentle lighting effect just by sort of scraping away at the value using the airbrush. And if you want to add some back, you just pick the color that you use as the base and then add that back exactly where you removed it. So like I want this shadow to stay here. And then the shortcut that I have set to take it back to negative color is C. So when I hit C, it goes to the checkers. And when I hit C again, it goes to the main color. And then when I hit X, it swaps between the background and foreground colors. So when I'm shading like this, I'll like be like, oh, I want to shade a little bit here. And then now I want to use the checkered color, the non-color, the eraser. So I hit C once and then it just turns into the eraser. And when after doing this for a while, you get kind of used to like just tapping that single button press to toggle between them. And I'm not perfect at it. I oftentimes do still just like do things that I don't exactly want to, but like you can get into a rhythm of using these features to shade your manga. And as you can see, it's starting to feel a bit skin-like. It's giving it a bit of a sheen to his skin. Is he greasy or is he just wearing a good amount of lotion? We'll never know. Unless I guess I write a line in that says whether or not he's greasy or just wearing a lot of lotion. Now, you probably have noticed when I zoom in a little bit, there is this like weird pattern that arises as a result of the dots, the individual dots, interacting with the screen resolution of my stream. And like that's called a moire. I think that's how it's pronounced. There might be another pronunciation for it, but that is just a natural result of using duotone, so just black and white colors on a screen. It's, you know, a complicated mathematical occurrence that happens, and there's really nothing that you can do about it. But the reason why you use screen tones in the first place is that it's way cheaper to print. If you only are using black and white, that means that the printer is only using single black dots to simulate this value. And so there is a utility to having this sort of duotone quality to it. Here's the thing though, if you just want to post your manga online, it's a bit disadvantageous to have this moire effect, especially when the audience is zooming in and out of your manga. And you've probably noticed from reading manga online or digitally that like there are instances where artists use the manga effect without it having this moire consequence. And I haven't found like a real workaround around that, but the shortcut that I have set up is that what I'll do is I'll take the screen tones that I've made, rasterize them, and then apply a filter, specifically the mosaic effect, which digitizes the screen tone and adds a sort of pixel by pixel anti-aliasing effect. And you can set this pretty low. Like I'm gonna try 3 here. And what you'll see is that it's not just black and white anymore. There's a few gray pixels between the black and the white, but what are you noticing about when you zoom out? There's significantly less moire because there's anti-aliasing going on. So if you want the feeling of a screen tone without getting the moire effect, what you can do is slightly pixelate or blur your screen tone in order to like get it to look this way. So when I'm posting a manga online, this is a thing that I do as a shorthand because this is naturally what happens as a result of JPEG artifacting. When you save a JPEG, the image gets saved at a slightly lower quality, and the more times it gets saved, the quality gets lower and lower. So when a person scans a manga, like scans the manga pages and posts them online, typically this just naturally happens as a result of JPEG artifacting. The dots get anti-aliased, and so you can simulate that consequence and make it like feel good digitally just by like making sure that it's not pure duotone. Now if I just undo, goes back to pure duotone, the moire basically comes back semi-instantaneously. There's a negligible difference between the original duotone and the mosaic effect. It might be worth taking into account that it may make it a little bit lighter because it's adding more gray pixels. So that is something to take into account. But the consequence is no moire versus yes moire. Okay, so separate from screen tones, oftentimes manga artists will use texture effects. I think that's what they're called, textures. So if you go into your materials folder in Clip Studio, which is the thing that looks like this, right? And then go under monochrome, that's typically where you'll find the majority of the textures. And sometimes it feels real good to just add a little texture on there. It's not going to be as economical to print because these textures do use gray pixels. So that's something to take into account. If you go into the subtool detail for your texture and then go to the tiling feature, you can hit tiling and it will cover the entire image with the texture. And I like to put a little bit of paper texture on my work and then lower it to somewhere around 16% opacity, just because like when you zoom in, it looks like you did it on paper. It looks like it's a scanned in textured paper, and like occasionally textures like this can really heighten the overall vibe of your illustration. I'm going to experiment really quick and just see. There might be the possibility of turning this texture into a screen tone. If we go to the layer properties and click screen tone while selecting the texture layer, I think it will just add a screen tone on top of it. Let's find out. It did. Now you've got a little bit of texture just on top of that, like is highly variable, right? Because it's on top of the texture layer, but like, you know, it just gives a little bit more oomph to the page. So that is another thing that you can do. It also differentiates between things that you want to be absolutely white, like the word bubbles for the text. So you can add a little bit of mood to your piece by adding texture and then applying the screen tone to that texture. There's another feature in Clip Studio that will allow you to take an image that's been rendered, whether it be painted or a photograph, and make that image look like it has been screen toned. And a lot of manga artists use this feature as a way of, like as a shortcut, because it's really difficult to render an entire scene every single time. So there are a bunch of manga artists that will go around their neighborhood, take a bunch of photographs, and then use this feature in Clip Studio that posturizes the different values in the image and then turns those corresponding values into screen tones. So let's look at that for a second. All right, so here's a photograph that I took many years ago while I was riding in a car, and my guess is that it's not tuned correctly to properly turn into a screen tone. So we're gonna experiment a bit, and I'm just gonna kind of walk you through what I'm doing. First off, I'm just going to turn it into a screen tone. Boop. It's too high resolution is a problem. So we're gonna resize it. Gonna undo the screen tone, then edit, change image resolution, and we'll lower it down to 2000 pixels wide. Yeah. And then fill screen. See, it fills the screen. Now I've added a screen tone. Now, this is not like super functional. It like looks like a photograph that's been turned into a screen tone. But there's a way in Clip Studio of taking a image that looks like a photograph and make it look like someone drew it in a manga. Now you may not believe me here, but give me a second, right? First off, I'm going to add a correction layer so that we can balance the levels a little bit. So one of the issues is that it's a bit too dark, so we're going to bring the light up. And then the darkness also, actually we'll leave that, but we'll move the gray up a little bit. Now, I'm going to take this effects layer and this other layer, and I'm going to put them inside of a folder, and I'm going to apply the screen tone effect to this layer, to this folder, and you can see that it does the screen tone to the folder, right? It's got both the effects layer and the background image in the, like, with the screen tone applied, and it changes because like if I toggle the visibility of the screen tone layer, I mean of the effects layer, or if I change the effect at all, you can see that like it's making it look more and less like, you know, a photograph or something that was like put into a manga. Now I'm going to turn off the screen tone layer and add a different effect, and that effect is going to be this thing. It won't allow me. Oh, you know why? It's because I'm trying to do it to a folder. God damn it. Okay, so it'll allow me to do the screen tone effect to the entire folder, but it won't allow me to do what I actually want to do, which is extract line, which can be found in the same area as in layer properties as screen tone. But if I select the layer that has just the image on it and I hit extract line, you see what it does. It extracts the lines. It finds the hard edges in the image and then it turns them into lines. And you can adjust this using a bunch of different settings, turning off the specific sides on which the lines appear. And you can also increase things like the black fill. And I think it's preset automatically to convert the lines, to convert the colors to tones. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a posterization feature, And what this is going to do is it's going to delineate between the different values and specifically add lines around where those different value thresholds are. So if I add a new one around the like darker shades, and then another one around the slightly darker shades, and then like get rid of this one, and then maybe add another threshold for just like, so we're getting a little bit of the clouds, then you see that it kind of, it's a little uncanny because it has this embossed effect, but by playing around with it a bunch, like you can get it to look like less like it's been like fake drawn and more like it's been real drawn. Sometimes it's just a matter of increasing the line width and allocating the lines to just a specific direction. So like left and right rather than up and down. You can layer these on top of each other by like duplicating this layer and then rasterizing one of them. And then going to edit and convert brightness to opacity, and then taking the effect off of the layer underneath it and like lowering the opacity of the one underneath it. So you've got this sort of like layered effect where you've got the impression of sort of what you're looking at, but it also just kind of like looks like a generic background, and it obfuscates somewhat the fact that it's a photograph without completely rendering everything invisible. And what a lot of manga artists will do is do something along these lines, right? Like have like a good amount of shadow so that you're getting the feeling, the noise of a background, and then they'll like take the original image, maybe lower the opacity of it, and then do pins on top of it so that you get the feel of the like hard manga outline. And I'm not going to do this to completion, but like you get the idea that like you can diversify the feeling of your backgrounds by using a photo as a reference and then adding your own sort of vibe to it by just like going through and adding inks on top, by giving and as a way of giving it a bit more of an impression without having to do the excruciating work of drawing every single thing every single time. This is a technique that a lot of different manga artists employ. Cutting corners is not a bad thing as long as you stylize the corners you cut, if that makes sense. If you add your own personality to it, it's the same thing as like doing enough work to keep something from like being considered copyright infringement. You add enough of yourself to it and it becomes yours. So you can go around and take photographs like this and, you know, superimpose your characters on top of them, and no one will know the difference. They'll just be like, ah, yes, a nice background. Anyway, that's that on that. Now, I personally am not a huge fan of using this sort of manga style screen tone effect. If I'm going to use screen tones, there's a pretty high likelihood that I'm going to employ them with the intention of highlighting the fact that I'm using screen tones, halftones in the first place. And so rather than a light screen tone, what I'm more likely to do is add a screen tone, have it so that the frequency is like really low so that it becomes very obvious that I'm using it. And when you do things like this, or like more specifically, use the fact that the screen tone reflects the brightness and or transparency of the layer, you can do things like add a gradient that gives a very specific transitioning effect. For instance, right, I'm gonna select the interior of the background here and make a new layer, select the gradient tool, and then set it to black on one end and transparent on the other. And then I'm going to like start a little bit off screen and go up like this, right? So now there's this like gradient that starts out dark and then goes apparently light, but really what it is it's transparent and becoming more and more transparent. Now by applying the screen tone effect on this layer, it screen tones it, but it also retains the transparency. So if I the frequency for this layer really low, it becomes really obvious that there are dots in use. And like sometimes that can be like a fun effect to just have instead of shading something. And this is largely my preference and what I use in a lot of my comics. Like if you see screen tones, halftones in my comics, it's probably going to be as a substitute for just a flat gradient. And that's partially because I just like am not a huge fan of how smooth flat gradients look. They remind me of what I call the digital dark ages of anime, when they just started using computers and things just didn't look quite like they looked a little too smooth, a little bit too digital. To combat that sort of dysphoria that I feel noticing that like it has that sensation to it, I just add a little bit of noise, and that noise, it can be a relatively smooth gradation from, you know, big dots to small dots. Now there are all kinds of fancy things that you can do on top of this. For instance, just adding another layer, clipping that layer to the screen tone layer, and then picking a color, you know, let's take this Tyrian purple here, and just filling that layer. It will like cover the screen tone with the color that you chose. Now if you try and fill the layer with the screen tone with this color, it's just going to make a screen tone that reflects the brightness of like this fill layer, and like that's not quite what we want. What we want is, you know, a screen tone that has the effect of being a screen tone, but that has a color on top of it. And the way that you get that effect is by adding a clipping mask. Now that we've covered the basics a bit and sort of given you a miniature crash course on how to use screen tones in Clip Studio, feel free to experiment. Figure out what sort of things you like, what frequencies you have a preference for, what sort of overall vibe you enjoy in other manga and would like to reproduce in yours. And also know that there are a lot of technical specs for how to optimize your screen tones for printing. And I am not at all skilled or knowledgeable about that, but I'm sure that there are books out there that can give you more insight than I ever could. But as a, you know, crash course 101, I hope that this is helpful. This has been Petal Party Pedagogy with me, your host Buttercup, animator, illustrator, sequential artist. We covered screen tones today. I don't know that you need the recap, but I hope you have a fantastic time zone and enjoy the time between now and when I see you next. Later.